Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Don't just go through the motions, practice professional Scrum. My name is Eric Naiburg, and I am the COO here at Scrum.org, and I'll be walking you through this session today. I just want to put a warning out there. Some of you may have noticed there's been a lot of internet disruptions over the last 12 hours. One of the big content delivery networks, Cloudflare, had an outage earlier this morning, and Zoom seems to be having some intermittent issues. So if you do have a problem, we apologize. This session is being recorded, hopefully, and we will have the recording available later today, assuming all goes well. Also, with that, we've got to love technology, and let's get started. So just brief about me, as I said, I'm the COO here at Scrum.org. I've written a few books, and I've spent most of my career in technology, focused mostly on product management and product ownership. I throw this picture here and put up this picture as a way to kind of get things started. One, it's interesting. That's me there circled. This is some people say, "Oh wow, you look really mad." It's no, I just caught 9 innings of a baseball game in about 90-degree heat. It's kind of cool if you see the guy in the second in the upper left. That's a former major league pitcher. Some of you, if you're a Boston Red Sox fan, may recognize him. His name's Oil Can Boyd, and he pitched in the 1986 World Series, and I had the pleasure of catching him that day, which was really cool. But the reason I put this picture there, not just to introduce myself, but it really helps me relate to Scrum, and specifically, and especially around self-management. But even just thinking of baseball, and those of you who are familiar with baseball, we have innings. Well, each inning is an opportunity to reflect of what happened the previous inning, and what do we need to do, right? We go into the dugout. What do we need to do and fix and change as we get into the next inning? Our sprint, we get our sprint review. We get together, we have our daily scrum in that dugout to talk about, okay, what's going to happen. And also thinking about self-management. We have to be empowered by the organization, by the manager, by the other players to work together on the field. As a catcher sitting behind home plate, I've got the best view of what's happening with a pitcher and what the batter is doing and thinking. As a matter of fact, on that day, Oil Can, his curveball was not working. He was throwing it, it was flat, and it was getting hit. Now, as that's who I am, going out to this former Major League All-Star and saying, hey, by the way, your curveball isn't working, so I'm not calling it. It's a little tough. But when I wasn't calling it, he actually called me out to the mound and said, you have to be thinking, why aren't you calling my curveball? So now I had to have the courage to say to this former major league ball player, yeah, I'm not calling it because it's just not working today, bud. And that's difficult. But we have to be empowered. And you know, as a third base coach, we have to be empowered to make decisions and wave somebody home or hold them up. We can't wait for 3 levels of management to tell us what to do. Empowering the people closest to what's happening at the time in the moment gives us the ability to execute more quickly, and often more educated, because we're there. We know what the problems are. We know what's happening. We know what's going on, and we're able to help resolve issues. So anyway, that's enough about that story, but I like it because it really does help emphasize a lot of the things that we see and that happen around Scrum. So first, setting some context, Scrum is 27 years old. Scrum was introduced, for those of you new to it, back at Uppsala in 1995, and continues to be the #1 approach for agile out there. And you look at surveys and data and things, and it's described in the Scrum Guide. Scrum.org Scrum.org founder and chairman and Scrum co-creator Ken Schwaber has created that Scrum Guide with Jeff Sutherland. They continue to update it and evolve it over time. But Ken presented that first version of Scrum back in 2007. I'm sorry, in 1995. So Scrum itself is really focused around complexity and helping people and teams solve complex problems. For very simple things and even complicated issues, often we don't need Scrum. Scrum is about empirical process. We sense and respond. We gain knowledge and learn and express that learning, and we change how we work. Empiricism based on that learning, and it helps us work through those problems and solve those complex, complicated problems. And Scrum really kind of focuses in there. What we do is we probe, we sense, and we respond. We're hoping at the end of the day, we have a team of people working together to help solve problems. We have different types of stakeholders and customers and users of whatever the product is that we're developing and building. Product can be anything, and we see product as anything these days. People are using Scrum to build automobiles. They're using Scrum to build software. They're using Scrum to figure out where to drill for oil and gas. They're using Scrum to manage their marketing campaigns or human resources departments and so on. And what we look at is, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What do we want to do? What's the desired outcome? How do we build something to solve that problem? And how do we get it out there and get that feedback and get that constant feedback on a very quick iteration? I've talked to Ken about this, and we talked one day about, well, why is a sprint 30 days or less? And his answer is pretty simple. If we wait longer than 30 days, we've probably waited too long to get feedback on what we've delivered. And then we're going to be delivering too much and not enough value and not able to re-architect or make changes if we're delivering the wrong thing. So we need to quickly get that feedback and continuously evolve how we're working and what we're building. We've all worked on those projects that we have that 18-month scope and we know everything we're going to deliver, and 18 months later we probably didn't even deliver it yet, and if we did, we delivered maybe a portion of it or maybe not even the right things. So Scrum helps me to get in that way, and it all starts with a product goal. That product goal is a commitment in Scrum and in the Scrum Guide, and that product goal helps us set that vision of where we're going in what we're looking to achieve. The product goal very likely will evolve as we learn and as we go forward, but it helps us set in stone, or not even in stone, because hopefully it changes, but set that vision, set that goal for achievement, so that all of the work along the way has that goal in mind, has the ability to point back to that goal. So if we're creating our sprint goal or creating those PBIs, product backlog items, those product backlog items should always have the product goal in mind. If they aren't going to help us achieve the product goal, why would we be doing them? And we have to ask ourselves that question. Do they need to be adjusted? Are they even necessary? Where are they in our priority order? And so on. So the Scrum framework, and hopefully most of you are familiar with this, the Scrum framework is fairly simple. It really helps us define the process at the lowest level. Scrum is not a methodology. Scrum really is a process framework from which your overall process evolves. This framework allows us to think about those iterations, right, that I talked about. It allows us to kind of plan our work, get that feedback, and improve how we work. You add lots of different practices that work for your team to help be successful. And that framework does not answer all of your questions. The team needs to answer those questions and figure out what is the best way to work. And what works for one team may not work for another. Hence the simple framework and those practices that build on top to allow for that. So then we have our product backlog, that product goal we talked about. The product backlog describes how we're going to achieve that goal. It has those product backlog items described and detailed out to help talk about that goal and what are the things that we need to achieve it. They're going to often be refined down. They may start bigger and get refined down into smaller work items. And they allow us to prioritize the work and see what potential work might be coming up as well. That product backlog is transparent and should be made available to key stakeholders so that you can get that feedback and they can understand where we're going and where we are. In our sprint planning, we look at what might we be able to do over the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 1 week, depending on how we've defined the sprint. Generally, or certainly no more than those 30 days or 1 month. The work that comes out of sprint planning goes into the sprint backlog. There's a myth around the sprint backlog that you must finish or have an entire sprint backlog plan coming out of sprint planning, and that's not true. I need just enough work to get going. And my sprint backlog likely will evolve as we start working because hopefully we're learning as we go. We're finding new things to do to solve those problems, focused on the sprint goal. And the sprint goal is defined by the team coming out of sprint planning. And all of the work that happens within that sprint is in focus of achieving that sprint goal. But I don't need to have a full sprint backlog filled out of sprint planning. I need enough work to get started, and we'll continue to work through that. The sprint backlog is the plan by the developers for the developers. Nobody else can determine what specifically is going to get done. And it's not a commitment. I may pull something into my sprint backlog and realize that it can't be achieved, and that's okay. We'll just put it back into the product backlog. Or maybe we'll refine it into something smaller that we can achieve during the sprint. But the sprint backlog is not a commitment that we will do this work. We may do this work as we go forward. So the daily Scrum, we get together 15 minutes or less once a day as a set of developers to talk about what happened and where we're going. It gives us an opportunity to replan. It gives us an opportunity to talk about things that maybe are getting in the way. It helps us have those conversations. You know, I have people ask me, oh, well, do I really need to do a daily Scrum? We talk anyway. Well, if you can't commit 15 minutes or less a day to make sure that you're coming together as a team, are you really being empirical? Are you really discussing these things? And it doesn't mean that meeting has to cover everything. You can have lots of other meetings as needed as a team. I apologize if you hear, it sounds like someone's outside about to blow cut grass off my sidewalk. So if that interrupts, I apologize. And then we have our sprint review. The sprint review is the culmination of all of the work that's been done during that sprint. Now, I can deliver many times during a sprint. I don't have to wait till the sprint review. As a matter of fact, the sprint review should not be a phase gate. The sprint review is an opportunity to review the work that's been done and get feedback so that we can improve and make sure we're not going in the wrong direction and get that work done and get that work accomplished in the right way in the future. The increment is a culmination of all of that work that was accomplished and is available for review. And then the sprint retrospective, which ends the sprint, is our opportunity to look at ourselves. Look at ourselves as a Scrum team and look at how we're working, the way we're working, maybe our definition of done, and all the things that make up our process of the way we work. And talk about that information. Talk about how we can improve our process. Do we need new practices? Do we need to bring in some flow metric practices? Do we need to measure differently? Do we have a problem with an interaction that happened during the sprint amongst team members, or even with maybe stakeholders or customers? And it gives us an opportunity to do that and really reflect and improve over time.
Hey, Eric, there's a comment that just came in from Jerry. He said that you just blew his mind with your comment that the sprint backlog is not a commitment made by the team. Can you expound on this?
Yep. So the sprint backlog is not a commitment because we may or may not accomplish that work. One, we should be careful not to pull in too much work. But I've heard people say, for example, oh well, all of a sudden we're getting down to the end of the sprint and everybody's working 18-hour days because we have to do all of this work to finish our sprint. That's not the case. The sprint is what it is. The timing is what it is, and the work accomplished is the work accomplished. We're not committed to all of the work we pull into the sprint. There's no reason things can't go to the next sprint. There's no reason that we can't, as we're working, right? Empiricism, say, oh, you know what? We pulled that in, but we don't think we can achieve that. Let's have that conversation and maybe push it back into the product backlog. The only thing we're committing to is the sprint goal and trying to achieve that sprint goal. We're not committing to any specific piece of work or level of work within that sprint backlog. Thanks, Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as simple as that. That is the Scrum framework. There are 3 accountabilities within Scrum. The product owner. Product owner is accountable for maximizing the value of the product. Developers, they deliver the incremental value by working together. And a Scrum Master who helps the product owner, the developers, the organization do Scrum, be agile. It helps guide them, coach them, mentor them into being better and doing better. The what, the how, the changes, they're going to depend on the situation. How we work is going to depend. What we do is going to depend. But we have these sets of commitments, and those are the things that we're going to be working on. And at the end of the day, this is all about delivering incremental value quickly. When I talked to Ken one day about one of his very, very first Scrum projects, and he was called into a financial institution. And this was back in the early 90s. And they were competing with the new online brokerage firms. And this was one of the typical brick and mortar type brokerage firms who had lots and lots of clients, but had never done anything online. And what was happening is they had been working on a project for more than 6 months. And in that project, they were struggling to actually deliver anything. And they weren't delivering the features and everything. So they brought Ken in to help them. And Ken said, just give me a team, give me about 10 people, and give me enough funding for 30 days, and we will deliver something. Right. And what he did was that team formed. They started to deliver, and they actually delivered an online experience. Was it the whole experience in 30 days? Of course not. But what they started to do is deliver value and get feedback rather than trying to build this enormous online experience and spending months and months and months trying to do it and not getting feedback and not knowing what's happening and not actually delivering something that they could get that feedback on. They first just delivered, okay, here's the login information and I can see my accounts, for example. Then they started to build in more and build in more. And that's what Scrum is about. It's about that incremental. It's about getting those things to happen and delivering value each and every sprint. Value in some way. It doesn't have to be something that's deployed. It could be something for feedback. It could be other things as well. The Scrum team must have all of the skills needed to deliver that increment. Hopefully more than one team member has a competency in certain areas. We hear people talk about things like comb-shaped people and pie-shaped people and T-shaped people. I think a comb-shaped person is pretty rare, and you're not going to find many of those. But people have different sets of skills, and we assemble that team to accomplish what we need. Hopefully those skills are shared, so if someone's on vacation or out sick or leaves, that the team doesn't start to suffer from that. However, it's not just about the Scrum guide. It's not just about mechanical Scrum. And I can do all of these things. I can have that daily Scrum. I can do my sprint planning. I can do my sprint review. I can have my sprint retrospective and follow that like a robot. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be successful. Often I hear people talk about, Scrum doesn't work. And when we dig into it, all they're doing is going through the motions. They're having a daily Scrum, which they're just talking about status and not even talking about the work to come up in what's getting in their way of being successful. They're doing sprint retrospectives, and all they're talking about is complaining about each other. They're doing sprint reviews, and they're just doing a demo and not even getting or listening to feedbacks. Yeah, we're doing Scrum. Well, yeah, I guess in theory they are, but it's what I would call mechanical Scrum. They're not living it. They're not breathing it. They're just going through the motions. And what Scrum really requires is a mindset change. It's more than just the framework. It's more than just checking the boxes and saying, okay, we did a daily today, we're good. It really is about the other side of it. There's a great case study that we have, and Lindsay can probably throw it in the chat for everybody. It's called the Scrum Reboot. It's one of our clients who was doing exactly this. They were doing mechanical Scrum, and they were failing, and they took a step back, which is rare for an organization, but they were able to do this. They took a step back and they reevaluated. Often what companies will do is blame the process and move on to another process or something different. But what they did instead was they actually looked at what was going wrong, and they realized that they weren't following the Scrum values. They weren't acting and thinking differently. They were just going through the motions. And when they changed this and they retrained themselves and reset the way that they think and approach the problems to put on and take on a new agile mindset, they were able to be successful because they moved from just going through the motions to really living and breathing Scrum. It's a great case study. Thank you, Lindsay, for throwing that up there. And have a read. It's a bit long, but it goes through a whole lot, and I think it really talks about this quite well. So the principles and values of Scrum are transparency, right? We provide that transparency so people know what's happening. The opportunity to inspect and adapt. We're always inspecting and adapting because we don't know everything. We don't know what's going to happen. I didn't know the guy was going to come outside my window this morning and start blowing the cut grass off the sidewalk. But he's there, so I'm going to adapt and pause for a second and take a drink. And with those things, we build trust. And without trust, and without trusting our team members and trusting the folks that we're working with and trusting our stakeholders and our customers, it becomes very difficult to achieve any of this success. And if we don't make things transparent, if we don't constantly inspect and adapt, we're not going to be able to build that trust. One of the other core things, and this was added, it was originally in a lot of the writings and the work that Ken had done around Scrum, and then added to the Scrum guide later, are the Scrum values. So these things here on the right hand side. Courage, that Scrum team members have the courage to do the right thing and to work on tough problems. Focus, everyone's focusing on the work of the sprint, the different goals of the Scrum team. Commitment, not commitment to the stuff we talked about earlier, right? But commitment to each other and to achieving those goals and to working together personally as a team and as team members. Respecting each other and openness to share. There's nothing worse than going into a sprint retrospective and everybody just smiling and saying everything's great and then hearing rumblings after that retrospective. We need to be able to be open. We need to be open with our stakeholders. If we're not going to deliver something, let's tell them. We need to be open with each other. And we need to be open with the folks within our organization and our customers, etc. And this is a mind shift change. It really is. This isn't just about, okay, saying the words, yep, we're focused today. It's about living it. It's about breathing it. It really is about the way that we work. So Scrum is about self-management. And that self-management must extend to everybody. The organization has to respect that. If the organization isn't respecting the way we work and allowing us as a Scrum team to come together and define how we work and what the folks on the team do and how they do their work, we're now going to start to fall into these traps. People won't be happy. People won't be achieving the goals that they set out. And the team itself has to respect that as well. The product owner needs to define the problem, not how to solve the problem. Let the developers, those people closest to the solution, solve the problem. Let them figure out the best way to solve it. You define it as a product owner. Define what that problem is. Let those folks doing the work solve it. Very often, I'll see product owners try to write requirements that really solve the problem instead of defining the problem. Let's self-manage our team and empower our teams to be successful. And that goes across the board. We need to have a growth mindset. This is a quote from Carol Dweck in an article in Harvard Business Review that I really like, and I pulled this out. Individuals who believe their talents can be developed through hard work, good strategies, and input from others have a growth mindset. They tend to achieve more than those with a more fixed mindset. Those folks who believe their talents are innate gifts. We need to always be learning. We don't know everything. We need to be thinking outside of the box. And the organization, managers aren't going away. Our managers, the folks within the organization and the folks within the team need to appreciate that, and they need to empower that. And we need to embrace it as well. Having a growth mindset allows us to try things. A big part of Scrum is experimenting because we don't know all of the answers. We don't know what's going to happen when we do something. And having the ability to try it and get that feedback, or find out it's hard, or find out we can't achieve it, those are okay. It's about trying things and being willing to admit that you don't know all of the answers up front, and that you're able to continue to move forward. We must be outcome oriented. The Agile Manifesto, those of you who don't know, was written in 2001. So after Scrum, I'll see sometimes people talk about, oh, Scrum doesn't mention the Agile Manifesto. That's because it came out after Scrum, actually. The Agile Manifesto describes 4 elements: individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It was written for software, so working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiations, and responding to change over just following a plan. These are some of the things I think that are super important when we think about being outcome oriented. When we're outcome oriented, we have to have that balance. And we need to balance doing what is needed with and being able to function as a team. We need to balance the amount of work that we can achieve. Right? That question earlier that Lindsay asked about, is the sprint backlog a commitment? No, it's not, because we need to find balance. And as we learn, we may have a different outcome. Our sprint goal may remain intact, but how we achieve it might change because we're moving forward. And we're trying to move forward, and we're trying to achieve these goals. If we're not delivering value, we need to adapt. We need to evolve what we're doing, because at the end of the day, we need to focus on that value. We need to focus on what can we deliver that's going to be appreciated. and it must be valuable to all. So, and I've lived this situation as a product owner, where we may have a customer who wants something, but they're only willing to say pay $1 for it, but it's going to cost us $2 to create and maintain. Was there value for the organization in doing that? Or are we going to actually lose money and have negative value? So when we look at value, it's value across the board. It's not just value for the stakeholders, right? It's not just value for the customers, or users. It's got to be value across the board. Now that value can be different. It could be a penny for one and $1 for another, and that might be okay depending on the situation. But we need to focus on that. What are our outcomes? So how do we put measures in place to measure those outcomes and drive and deliver toward them? This is always a touchy subject, ethical behavior. What does that mean? It's interesting, again, talking with Ken about this. He talks about, well, in the medical profession, we take a Hippocratic oath, and there's standards that people have to stay with, and people have to abide by. And as a professional, we need to have and embrace a set of ethical standards. They may differ from industry to industry, or region to region, as there's other things that come into play. But we must hold each other on the Scrum team accountable for this as well. So as part of that ethical behavior, it's really, really important to look at ourselves, look internally, and embrace and enhance that.
Eric, there's a question that came in that
Okay.
kind of ties to all these points. What would you advise to build an agile mindset?
That's a tough question. There's so much that goes into it. I think it starts with really kind of bringing the team together and setting that expectation with the team. I think it really is about living and not just following the process or going through those motions. It's really important for people to understand why we're doing it, not just what we're doing.
Right.
A lot of times in our training, in the work that we do in our training classes at Scrum.org, we run exercises, and those exercises actually demonstrate the importance of the mindset change and the ethical behaviors and all of that. And sometimes doing what you think is the right thing may not be best for the customers or the organization. And running exercises, there's a lot of great exercises out there there are a lot of great exercises out there that actually help switch that mindset and drive that by learning from past history and past experiences. One of the exercises that we run, if you've been in our classes, there's an exercise called Squirrel Burger, and the employee in this instance thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing the right thing, but they weren't. They weren't taking a whole bunch of things into consideration of the impact and the impact that would have. All they were doing is going through the motions. Somebody wanted something, they delivered what the person wanted. That's great. But what are all the other impacts of making that decision, of making a decision, and really teaching people to think through their decisions and how those decisions go through.
Thanks.
Measuring value. So we have something called the Evidence-Based Management Framework, or EBM, that Ken and the team have delivered. And this starts to get into that value conversation in the work of value. and how we measure it. The measures of value of the Scrum team are broken into these four areas. Current value, what are we able to deliver of what we've delivered. Unrealized value, the gap between what we have today and what is available for the future. And what do we need to do to close that gap so we deliver more and more value? And do we have the ability to innovate, the ability to deliver value, and how quickly can we deliver it? You can check out the EBM content for a lot more on that. But part of that mindset, part of really evolving to professional Scrum is measuring value delivered and finding ways, and what your measures are going to be different than my measures or somebody else's measures. But finding a way to really look at and understand the value that's being delivered in over time. It's not about feeds and speeds. Too often I read articles or read people posting on the forum or hear, a customer say, our measure for value is throughput, right? Or velocity. I don't care about your velocity. I care about the value you're delivering. I can deliver a lot of garbage really, really fast. I don't care about how fast I can deliver if it's not tied to these other things. I'd written an article, I guess probably 2 years ago, maybe even more now, on don't use velocity as a weapon. And too often I see that. Velocity is not a way to compare two teams, because what I say is one thing, another team may say is something else. The only thing velocity helps me do is get some prediction as to what we're going to be able to deliver, or how much we're going to be able to deliver next sprint or the following sprint as we evolve as a team. It's not a weapon. It's not a measurement for value. It's only a measurement for stuff going out the door, those feeds and speeds, if you will. Scrum is not a manufacturing process of just get a whole bunch of stuff out. I look at, I've had this conversation, my wife's in food manufacturing. Her and I have had this conversation quite a bit, that, in manufacturing, it's all about how much can we get out as quickly as we can at the lowest cost. And they often ignore certain factors, like, what risks are we willing to take on? What risks shouldn't we take on that maybe we're taking on for those speeds and feeds and so on? So let's measure value. Let's look at, are we delivering value to our customers today, our users today, as well as to the folks who are supporting us? Where is the gaps in that value being delivered? And how do we close those gaps, and how are we able to, and how quickly are we able to close those gaps? Check out the work on EBM. It's really, really good work, and provides kind of a framework for measurement. It doesn't define all the measures. It provides the framework for those measures. So, to me, professional Scrum still includes the Scrum Guide, right? The Scrum Guide's still sitting there in the middle. And it still includes that Scrum Guide and all of the things that happen within mechanical Scrum. But I also need to change the way I work. I need to make sure that I don't just read the Scrum values, but I live them. I adhere to those Scrum values. And I create that respect. I create trust within my team, within each other, and within the organization. That I am ethical, and that we as a Scrum team are thinking in having the courage to raise up ethical issues. All of these things kind of work together. They kind of come together here. If we're being unethical and don't have the courage to bring it up, and you think of, there's lots of examples of this, certainly in many industries. If we're not able to do that, then what's the point? What's the point? Are we really working together? How are we working together? And so on. So, a happier team is going to live these. That happier team is going to not just focus on, oh gosh, we did this, now we did this, now we did that. But they're really focused on just let's work, let's have fun, let's work together. and not just check the boxes and say, all right, we had a daily Scrum. It's funny, because people who don't know Scrum, who I talk to all the time, especially family members, ask me, "Oh, so Scrum, is that an acronym, or is that just some rugby thing that you made up?" And to me, it's actually pretty simple. A Scrum in rugby is all about a team coming together to move things forward. Right? In Scrum, or in rugby, it's moving the ball forward. In Scrum, as we're talking about, it's moving the product forward and coming together. If I don't trust the people around me in that rugby Scrum, I'm not going to want the ball. I'm not going to want to work together. If we don't work together as a team, the other team's going to get that ball. They're going to move. They're going to take the ball and move it the other way. It really does come together, and that is what it's named after. Scrum came from that Scrum in rugby, because it's about a team working together cohesively, respecting each other, focused on the team, right? And really pushing forward that ball, or like I said, in our case, the product. So what does it all mean? The core ideas are really pretty simple. It's about a empirical process, right? We're constantly inspecting and adapting so that we can improve, both improve how we work and the work that we're doing. It's about empowered teams, allowing the teams to make those decisions closer to where they are. And it's about continuous improvement, improving the deliverables, and like I said, improving the way we work. So with that, don't leave your brain at home, or in the most recent cases, in a different room, since so many of us work from home these days. The post-industrial age, as we've moved into more knowledge work, and a lot of what we do requires a different way of working. Scrum provides that foundation for that. It doesn't mean just, oh, we're now following Scrum, we're going to be perfect. No, we need to do it right. We need to add the values, the growth mindset, and so on. We need to live it. We need to change the way we work, and the way we think, and the way we act, and the way we work together as a team. Not just, oh, we followed the process. So briefly, who is Scrum.org? And then we'll take some more questions. There's Ken. I've talked a bit about Ken throughout this session. Ken is a co-founder, the founder and chairman of Scrum.org, and the co-creator of Scrum. Scrum.org provides thought leadership, like that Scrum guide we talked about. We provide consistent global training, certification respected around the world, and ongoing learning resources like this session today. All of our resources on our website are free and openly available, and that's part of Ken's mission in helping people and teams solve complex problems. So we provide a whole lot out there. There's our resource center, there's webinars, there's videos, there's blogs posted almost every day to help people learn and improve the way they work. So with that, I'll take some questions. And now I see one question that makes me have to go all the way back to the first slide, if I can do that. Let's see. Oh, someone asked, why am I wearing a different jersey than everybody else? And I hope that's not the case. I am not. You can see the black jersey under there. I just finished catching 9 innings, and I've got my chest protector on top of my black jersey. So I am not wearing a different jersey than everybody else. But thank you for that question. Yeah, Lindsay.
Here's a question. Since we were just talking about the Scrum values and ethics, someone asked if breaking the Scrum values immediately means we're unethical.
Maybe. It would depend on the situation, the scenario. How are we breaking them? Probably. I don't know that I have a definitive answer on that, not knowing the situation. But I would say, certainly ethical behavior is more than just the Scrum values. But the Scrum values certainly help me to create a sense of ethics and a sense of ethical value. So I'd say probably, but I don't want to say absolutely most most definitely, because it could depend. Ethics isn't always clear. I always I always look at it as if I think it's wrong, it's probably wrong and probably unethical. But ethics is a very, very gray area for sure.
Thanks. It's good idea there. This next question from Raj. In my work as an integration lead, I've seen features and user stories talking about setting up an environment which doesn't address the business value. Should this be set as a sprint goal and we would tailor the stories appropriately? What's your recommendation?
So just setting up an environment doesn't really, as you said, Raj, create value. How about we start to set up that environment and put something in that environment, and have part of the sprint goal is creating the environment with, I don't know what the work is, but with something in there that we can actually get feedback from. Now, if that environment includes things that you can get feedback on and that are adding value to folks on the team, maybe it is okay. Business value can be measured in many ways. If you notice in the 2020 version of Scrum Guide, Ken and Jeff removed potentially releasable from the definition of an increment, because value can be defined in many ways within an organization, and it doesn't have to be released or even releasable. It has to be feedbackable, which is not a word, but I have to be able to receive feedback from it. Right? I need to, as an organization, derive value from it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something released. Now, if I create this environment that you mentioned and can't validate that this is going to help me move forward, then I'm probably not getting much value out of it. So if I can build something within that environment, even if it's something small, to test it and validate it and make sure it's ready, yeah, I see no problem there.
Thanks, Eric. Just a reminder to everybody, please make sure that you're entering your questions into the Q&A and not into the chat, just so that if we don't get to all of these, that they're all captured at the end of the session so we can share them with Eric to figure out a way to address them. So please make sure you're adding them into the Q&A. So this next question from Chris, I'm trying to understand how multiple Scrum teams can operate under one program. How can you manage an agile program without being constrained with a waterfall delivery plan, which contains milestones, phases, etc.?
That's a big question with a few words, Chris. Yeah. So if you haven't checked it out, check out the Nexus framework. The Nexus framework talks about exactly this. It's about teams working together. I don't have to have long, drawn out milestones to have multiple Scrum teams working together. What I need to do is I need to have the ability for those teams to communicate. I need to have the ability for those teams to actually plan together, so I can look at the dependencies and interdependencies and handle those interdependencies across teams and cross-team collaboration. It also depends on how you define product. Hopefully we're defining product as a single thing. And as long as we're all working toward that single goal, that product goal, we can work together to break up items and start moving toward it. I really believe, and this isn't required, but having the sprints running at the same time and the same length, so that I have a common sprint review as a whole, is very helpful. Having two different retrospectives can be very helpful as well. So having a team retrospective, looking at how we work as an individual Scrum team, but also having a retrospective of the broader team, in Nexus we would call of the Nexus, is also very helpful to help improve those things. And having representatives come to a daily Scrum from the different Scrum teams to talk about dependencies, interdependencies, how they improve the way they work as a greater team. I can still have those milestones. There's nothing in Scrum that doesn't say we're going to predict where we will be in 3 months, or we'll, kind of lay out a 3-month plan. Just hopefully that plan will change as we get closer to it. It changes anyway, no matter, if I'm using waterfall, or sometimes we're just ignore it. I worked on a project for a product that every month we were 18 months away and we never really changed anything. That's not a good way to work. So coming together, working together is really a big part of it. But have those longer term goals, have those longer term conversations, right? And even in your sprint planning, start talking about, well, this is what we're striving toward, and then constrain it down to, okay, now what can we actually deliver to get there each sprint?
Great, thanks, Eric. This next question from Camila: if I work in consulting and have to work with teams external to my company, how can I persuade them into working with the Scrum framework if they're used to waterfall?
Do what Ken did. Give me a team, give me 30 days, and we'll deliver something. And that's exactly, Ken was a consultant that the organization brought in, and that's exactly what he did. He walked in and said, give me a team, give me 30 days, give me enough money to fund that team for 30 days, and we will deliver something, and you will see and appreciate that value. By doing that gives me the ability to start to prove it. I see no better way to prove things than actually doing it. We've got some case studies, and Lindsay shared the link to the one case study. There are other case studies out on our website, of course, and everything as well. But leveraging experience, leveraging the work, but at the end of the day, prove it.
Thanks, Eric. This next question here: how can you create a culture where management allows people doing the authority? Oops, I'm reading it wrong. How can you create a culture where management allows people doing the work, give them the authority to do it without interference?
So that's a big part of the Scrum Master's role, or in the work that the Scrum Master is doing. Again, prove it. Let's create a 2-week sprint and deliver something and prove that we could do it. But you've got to have those conversations with leadership, with management. I've heard some folks talk about hippos, the highly paid person in the room or in the organization, and controlling them and helping them to understand, and sometimes keeping them out of the way as well. But it really is about conversations and building that trust, making things transparent, having them understand how things are working. Make sure they're part of those sprint reviews. You're going to build part of that trust by making sure they're in those sprint reviews and they're seeing the work that's being done, and you're having those discussions. And oh, by the way, you don't have to lock everybody in a room during the sprint and they can't not talk to people. Have the product owner, even developers, talking to folks, getting feedback throughout the sprint. Have them, engaging with customers. Not only the product owner engage with customers, anybody on the Scrum team can. Have them engage with leadership, and have those open conversations. It's funny, this is a long time ago now. This is probably, I don't know, 2004 or 6, somewhere around there. We were kicking off Scrum for a large insurance company here in the US and the Midwest. And we had an amazing vice president of IT there, because he used to capture everything and data on everything. So he was able to show the rest of leadership and his teams, here's what it's like today, and here's what it's like as we started to have some teams using Scrum. Have those measurements are really valuable, and show the evolution and the changes over time. He had all kinds of measures that he put in place, and he was able to demonstrate, okay, we've now got 2 teams using Scrum, and this is what the value they're able to deliver compared to what other teams are doing. Value, not velocity. Having those things and being able to have those conversations. But then what he would do is he would bring the whole organization together and have these conversations and do presentations of the value being delivered, presentations of how they work, having team members talk about the work that they were doing and so on, to start to build that continuity and build that relationship within the team.
Great, thanks, Eric. This next question, we have time for maybe 2 more questions here. There's so many here. So any recommendations for teams who want to follow the Scrum framework but have to work on multiple products during a given sprint? And how would you set a sprint goal in that instance?
So that's a tough one, but it's one that happens quite often. Focus is really important in Scrum. So if we have to work on multiple products, is there a way to divide up our time so that we're not just constantly context switching, whether it's parts of day or days of a week or something like that? Are there ways that we can look at, are you needed full time on one of those Scrum teams? If you're needed full time on the Scrum team, then you can't work on multiple products. If you're not, can you be a service to that Scrum team? There's a couple articles and white papers that have been written around the concept of a Scrum studio. They're out on our website, and there may be folks that are a service to the Scrum team. They're not full time. They don't have constant work on the Scrum team, but they come in and they help in certain areas. And by being able to clearly define that makes it very helpful. I think clear boundaries for sure are needed so that we know what's being done when and by whom. Clear boundaries as to here's when I'm committed to the Scrum team and the work that I'm able to deliver. Not overcommitting and don't overcommit to anything. And then looking at it as and having those open conversations. It might be a great retrospective conversation that ends up happening of I'm being pulled too thin and I need to dedicate myself for the next 3 sprints. And this could change over time too. You may have one sprint where you need 100% focus on that one product. And then the next sprint, something else is being done that maybe you don't, and you can divide your time or go over to that other team. So there's not, again, there's a lot of gray area here. But keep in mind those things like focus, commitment to the team, your ability to execute and deliver value are super important.
Great, thanks, Eric. I think we probably do not have any more time for any more of these questions. These questions all look like they're pretty deep. So I will share these with Eric after the session.
Yeah, what we'll try to do is we'll get back to you via email, assuming most of them we have emails for you all, and we'll be able to email you answers the best that I can. Just, or feel free to reach out. You've got my contact information and everything as well. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.